Hello, everyone. This is Peter Drogi, and we will like to introduce you to the seventh webinar that we have prepared for you on the state of the oceans and their role in climate change and planetary dynamics. The oceans are the major force of our climate trajectory in a planetary sense, and I'd like to just reinforce that by introducing this agenda today with a welcome to a series of speakers who will introduce you to the major drivers behind that. And I'd like to ask Admiral Dowan, the former Chief of Naval Staff at the Indian Navy, who's has a 42-year career in the Indian Navy, a former chairman of the National Maritime Foundation, the premier maritime think tank of the Navy. He founded SAMDES, which is the Society for Aerospace, Maritime, and Defense Studies, and is our partner in this project. He is also the founder of the Global Maritime Accord, and we work together to drive this academy. So, Admiral, would you like to begin and welcome everyone and update us? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Peter, for those kind words. At the very outset, I would like to accord a very warm welcome to our very distinguished speakers, Professor Lisa Levin, Admiral Ben Beckering, Professor Mecheni, and Ms. Amber Fatima. We would also extend a very warm welcome to our teams at the Liechtenstein Institute of Strategic Development, the Society for Aerospace, Maritime, and Defense Studies, the Trebuchet USA, the International Military Council on Climate and Security Netherlands, the Commonwealth Security and Resilience Group UK, and India's international movement to United Nations. A very warm welcome also to all the participants who have netted in across various time zones for the seventh webinar of the Global Maritime Accord Academy, which is actually a precursor to the launch of Ocean Action Year on World Ocean Day this year. The recent geopolitical events and conflicts are pointers to indicate that the instabilities and turbulence on land in many parts of the world have the potential to spill over into the maritime domain, and the situation can best be described as fragile. Wars and emissions during conflicts have a negative impact on climate change, but are rarely spoken about or discussed. In addition, nations pay great attention and carry out great investments in the seas and the oceans for maritime security, for sovereignty, as well as the control of resources, also for their use as the global maritime highways and as oil and energy arteries. But a negligible attention is paid by nations towards the health of the oceans or to preserve and conserve the biodiversity. Humankind continues to be blind to the fact that the oceans have a very important role to play in regulating the climate. And what we see is that the oceans are currently facing great challenges due to indiscriminate pollution of the seas and contamination of the natural maritime habitat, which has resulted in a detrimental impact on climate change as well as disruption of the weather pattern. The 1982 United Nations Convention on Law of the Seas did not have any formal cover on sovereignty as well as the legislation or indeed governance of areas beyond national jurisdiction. And these laws relied heavily on the goodness of humankind. The concepts that were followed were the freedom of the seas, which was a finders, keepers approach, and the common heritage of mankind, which was a shared benefit approach. However, over the decades, the oceans became extremely vulnerable to the greed and want of humankind, and this resulted in overfishing, pollution, and plundering of the oceans. After years of deliberations and negotiations, the High Seas Treaty, or the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction, was adopted by the member nations in June 2023 and then ratified in January this year for conservation, preservation, protection of biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. As the discussion now move towards implementation, this provides a unique window of opportunity to the Global Maritime Accord to come up with a holistic and a comprehensive action plan to counter the detrimental impacts of global warming and climate change by leveraging the oceans for conservation, preservation, protection, and sustainable development. The minimal progress in this sphere actually has strengthened our resolve at the Global Maritime Accord Academy to conjoin all forces and stakeholders to halt and prevent any further degradation in the health of the oceans and to take action now. And that action is to chart the way ahead to ensure clean and healthy oceans for our future generations and steer steadily towards our vision to save the oceans for a safe Earth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And one of the challenges we are facing, of course, is this semantic segregation of the oceans and its affairs and laws, its negotiations, its politics and policies and industries, and the terrestrial, the continental activities on which most people's minds are structured. So one of the challenges we are facing here with everyone in this room is to go beyond that and to think of the oceans being a planetary challenge that involves everyone. Very few people are aware that the global warming, the heating we experience in the atmosphere is only 1% of the energy that's being absorbed by the planet. 90% are being absorbed in the oceans, and the rest in ice caps, in glaciers, and on land. And so this extraordinary imbalance between perception and reality is something that is the major focus of our leading speaker today, Dr. Lisa Levin. She's probably the most distinguished scientist alive today in oceanography and the future of the oceans. And she has been for a very long time at this leading institution, the Scripps Institution of Oceanography at the University of California in San Diego. She's been elected to the US National Academy of Sciences in 2024, and she received the Nobel Prize for Ocean Sciences, the 2019 Prince Albert First Grand Medal. She's also a co-founder of the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative and has been a key contributor to many IPCC reports. Lisa, I welcome you and thank you very much for honoring our webinar with your presence and presentation.
Thank you. Somebody is going to have to enable my video because it says it's disabled. So I want to thank the organizers for allowing me to speak.
Can you ask for permission?
Yeah. I can ask for permission to share.
Yeah, please.
But
it's working now. You're sharing.
Okay, yeah. But you can't see me.
Yes,
I guess.
I can see you and I can see your presentation.
Oh, okay. My video shows as frozen, but that's fine. Great. Oh. Anyway, thank you for the opportunity today to talk about the deep ocean and the high seas. And we had a great introduction from the Admiral to many of the issues that I'm actually going to be discussing. I've given my title Deep Ocean Discovery, Dangers, and Decisions. And really, this is to present the idea that the oceans are now at a crossroads. And we have a lot of decisions to make about what happens to the deep ocean. But I want to start with some deep ocean basics, what we do and don't know. I'll talk about some of the current challenges and threats to the deep ocean, how these are governed, what policy engages the deep ocean, and I'll focus in particular on areas beyond national jurisdiction, because as you heard, we have a new treaty and there are many action opportunities there. So to begin at the beginning, I think most people who are online here probably realize the ocean covers 70% of our planet. It's critical for the health of the planet. And we really only have one highly interconnected ocean. And maybe you don't typically see it from this perspective with the South Pole at the center, but this shows very clearly there's really only one ocean, not multiple oceans. And 60% of that ocean falls in areas beyond national jurisdiction. That's more than 200 nautical miles offshore, and 96% of that is the deep sea, what we define as being below 200 meters. And even within exclusive economic zones, areas that countries control, most of that's also deep sea, 75%. So the deep ocean forms about 95% of the habitable volume on this planet. And why should we care about it? Well, you've already heard from the Admiral many of the reasons. We need to know ocean bathymetry and water properties for national security. It's where we lay our cables, communication cables and pipelines. We need to know about the deep ocean to understand natural hazards. It holds a wealth of biodiversity that is proving to be important to us. We extract resources like fisheries and oil and gas from the deep ocean now. We need to understand the deep ocean circulation to model climate and to better understand climate regulation by the ocean. And we're looking at mining the deep ocean. I'll talk more about that. And of course, it's also important for navigation, safety, and shipping. So there are many different reasons why we need to understand the deep ocean. So how much of it have we actually mapped? Well, the answer is just over 25% as of last year. You can see the regions that are mapped, lots of mapping in the North Atlantic, Gulf China, and the Central Pacific and along the continents, but very little in the Southern Hemisphere. To finish mapping, it would require 200 ship years. Now, it might not all happen with large vessels. There are new autonomous vehicles, crowdsourcing for fishing vessels, new echo sounders on the Argo floats. There are many new ways of mapping, so it may actually get done in our lifetime. But mapping the seafloor bathymetry is only one part of understanding the ocean. We have actually visually seen very, very little of it. There's been about 44,000 historical dives with submersibles and remotely operated vehicles in 12,000 locations. But how much of the seafloor have we actually seen? Only about 0.001%. That's actually visualizing the marine life and the ecosystems. And I think from what we have seen, even from that very little and from the mapping, we know the deep sea floor is in fact not a single ecosystem. It's one ocean, but many, many ecosystems. This geomorphological map produced over a decade ago shows that there are different geomorphological features, abyssal plains, hadal areas, which are in fact the deep trenches. We have canyons, seamounts, geos, sills, valleys, troughs, ridges, rises, terraces, and so on. And each of these actually forms different types of ecosystems. So when I think about the deep ocean, I think about the different habitats formed by the geomorphology and hydrography. We have oxygen minimum zones these are naturally occurring low oxygen areas. We have vast abyssal plains covered with these potato-sized polymetallic nodules. We have lots of layers in the water column, the mesopelagic, the deep pelagic, full of biodiversity. We have tens of thousands of seamounts. We have canyons and fjords along our continental margin, thousands of them, hundreds to thousands. We have cold water corals and sponges forming massive reefs that extend for many kilometers, creating their own habitats. And then we have chemosynthetic ecosystems, or whale falls, hydrothermal vents, methane seeps that survive on chemical energy rather than sunlight. And each of these habitats has its own biodiversity, species that are endemic to those habitats. Now, all of those habitats, most of them have very extreme conditions that have led animals to evolve adaptations to these conditions, and they help us understand the limits of life. So we have animals that can live at super high temperatures, 50 to 80 degrees centigrade. We have animals that can live at super low pHs, pH 5. We have animals that can tolerate very high hydrogen sulfide, millimolar levels that are normally toxic. We have animals that can survive at super low oxygen, just a few micromolar. Animals that can live at 1,000 atmospheres of pressure. That is 1,000 times what we're at in our deep trenches. We have animals that have evolved to digest wood and whale bones on the deep sea floor. And my favorite superpower is the power of extreme longevity. We have animals that live for fish that live for hundreds of years, like the Greenland shark, the oldest fish of 400 years old. But we also have corals and sponges that literally can live for thousands of years. Alongside this great biodiversity and the superpowers of the animals, we have resources generated in these habitats. For example, low oxygen areas, the microbes sequester phosphorites, which we're interested in mining for fertilizer. In the abyssal plains, there are cobalt, nickel, and copper-rich polymetallic nodules of interest for mining. The hydrothermal vents have massive sulfides. The seamounts have ferromanganese crests, also with trace metals of interest for mining. We have in canyons and on slopes accumulation of oil and gas, which we're now extracting from the deep sea. We have aggregations of fish around seamounts, sometimes around methane seeps and nursery grounds in the cold water corals and we're harvesting some of these species. And we're looking now at harvesting fish, the billions of fish that migrate up and down every day in the mesopelagic zone. So the deep sea provides a host, and I should say the high seas and the deep sea provide a host of ecosystem services. It's very important. I should say it plays a very important role in carbon cycling and nutrient regeneration, both which help regulate the climate. I've already mentioned cables and energy, fisheries. There are many pharmaceutical interests from the genetic resources down there. There's the potential for climate solutions. There's templates for human blood and bone among the organisms. There's interest in biomimicry. There are cultural values, inspiration for the arts. There are spiritual values for indigenous people. So the deep ocean is important to people in many, many different ways. But it's not pristine. There is a growing human imprint. We know the world population is growing rapidly, and this is leading to a demand for more food, more energy, more raw materials, for more metals and rare earth elements to fuel the green revolution, but also our electronics. And of course, we're emitting more carbon dioxide alongside the growth of human population. And this has led to increasing human activities in the deep ocean. So as we deplete our resources on land and shallow water, we have moved into the deep sea. So it's now routine to extract oil and gas from up to 3,000 meters water depth offshore. We typically fish to 1,000 meters water depth, often with bottom trawls. We are looking at mining in both national and international waters, and in abyssal plains, on seamounts, and at hydrothermal vents for minerals. We are beginning to extract genetic resources, looking for new pharmaceuticals of various sorts. There's a little bit of deep sea tourism that has actually begun to go on. We are disposing of waste from land. For example, minerals mining on land produces toxic tailings that are disposed into the deep sea in some countries. We also have a lot of unintentional disposal into the deep ocean of debris, of plastic, and of contaminants that run off from land and our rivers. And now we're looking at disposing of carbon dioxide through a whole variety of technologies into the deep sea. So all of these human activities bring different types of disturbance. They physically disrupt the seafloor, they create suspended sediment plumes, they alter the substrate, that is the surfaces that the life lives on. They lead to contamination, loss of three-dimensional structure, changes in food webs, sometimes bycatch, unintentional catch of fishes. And all of this human disturbance is basically also subject to climate change. So climate change in the form of warming waters, more acidic waters, and low oxygen waters, loss of oxygen, is all superimposed on these different direct forms of human disturbance. And I think it's worth pointing out that deep sea ecosystems have a host of special features that mediate this vulnerability to disturbance and in fact make them much more vulnerable. I think we need to recognize that most species and some ecosystems in the deep sea remain undiscovered, so we have no baseline data against which to assess disturbance. Many animals exhibit great longevity and late maturation, so they recover very slowly from disturbance. There's a tremendous amount of heterogeneity and habitat endemism, and that means that there's multiple responses to disturbance. There is no one-size-fits-all regulation. There is extreme dependence on stable hydrologic and geochemical properties, but we are changing those with climate change and with our activities. And animals can't always adapt. There are strong mutualistic interactions. This means that animals rely on each other, and so if we damage one species, we affect many others. And there are strong connections of the deep ocean to both the surface and to other ocean basins. So if we create impacts in one area, these transfer to other areas or from the surface downward. So we risk destruction of deep sea biodiversity and ecosystems before discovery and understanding if we do not carefully regulate our activities. One example is the scaly-foot snail. This, I would say, one example of vulnerable species. This is the first IUCN red listed species from the deep sea. It occurs only at hydrothermal vents, and all of the hydrothermal vents are under mining exploration contracts right now where this snail lives. So it was considered vulnerable to extinction. So we're in the process of making a lot of decisions about the deep sea right now. We're deciding whether to mine, where to mine, how to regulate it. We're deciding whether to continue extracting fossil fuels. We are deciding whether to continue bottom fishing. Bottom trawling is below 800 meters, is in fact banned in many countries, I think in the EU. We're deciding how and where to dispose of waste or to allow it. We are deciding on biodiversity protection. We have a goal of protecting 30% of the ocean by 2030. And to do this, we need the deep ocean protected and the high seas. We're deciding what to do about climate change, whether to phase out fossil fuels and how to address climate mitigation, including marine carbon dioxide removal. So what can we do to promote oceans sustainability, and who decides? Well, the Admiral mentioned the law of the sea. There's 168 nations that have ratified the law of the sea. And of course, these create the zones that you've already heard about, the exclusive economic zones out to 200 miles and areas beyond national jurisdiction, beyond in which we have freedom of the high seas and the common heritage of mankind. And nations can also claim extended continental shelf and the resources that reside on these. So in areas beyond national jurisdiction, which, as I mentioned, is 60% of the ocean, we have an alphabet soup of high sea of governance. And a lot of siloing. So biodiversity, for example, is regulated by the Convention on Biological Diversity and the new BBNJ agreement that I'll talk more about. Climate is regulated by the UNFCCC, fisheries by the FAO and the regional fisheries management organizations. Also, the Convention on Migratory Species and the Regional Seas organizations. Mining is managed separately by the International Seabed Authority. Pollution by the London Convention and London Protocol under the International Maritime Organization. Science is overseen by the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, and conservation group actions, for example, by the Whaling Commission or the Convention of the CITES, Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species, and also now by the BBNJ agreement. So we have this siloing, and a real challenge is how all of these organizations are going to communicate together to manage this one highly interconnected ocean. So the areas beyond national jurisdiction are all the tan areas you see here. And they are the focus of this new treaty called the BBNJ Agreement. It's on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction. And as the Admiral said, it's been a long time under negotiations and discussion. It started in 2006. It entered into force January of this year, and it's now been signed by 145 countries and ratified by 88. And it has a number of different elements, all designed to provide equitable access to the high seas, the open ocean area beyond national jurisdiction, to protect biodiversity, to allow for sustainable use, and to create a scientific basis for management. So the major elements involve marine genetic resources, and it creates a format for benefit sharing should those resources turn into commercial profits. It involves area-based management and for the first time, the opportunity to create marine protected areas in beyond national jurisdiction. And as I mentioned, we need these if we want to achieve 30 by 30. It creates the opportunity for environmental impact assessments for the first time in areas beyond national jurisdiction. And it has a very strong component of capacity building and transfer of marine technology designed to really allow all the nations of the world to participate in the management and protection and use of areas beyond national jurisdiction. And now, since we're very interested in climate here, I would say climate is not one of the pillars, but there is language in this agreement that allows climate for climate smart implementation. And I think that's one of our big challenges, is to make the area-based management the MPA's Climate Smart, to use genetic resources to find climate solutions, to create environmental impact assessments that incorporate the cumulative effects of climate change, and to build capacity and transfer marine technology that allows for monitoring of climate and climate hazards and climate predictions. Beyond the BBNJ agreement, there are a couple of treaties under negotiation on plastic pollution and on chemicals, waste, and pollution. And we're going to hear more about that later in this session. So, but I think it's important to recognize that these are still under negotiation, and this is a new science policy panel on chemicals, waste, and pollution. I don't think they're at treaty stage yet. But I want to close with the idea that the future of the high seas and the deep ocean is really at a crossroads. We have many challenges, but those challenges also present opportunities. So one of our great challenges is to harmonize all those UN agencies, instruments, and bodies and get them to work together. Another challenge is to create implementation of the BBNJ agreement and, in fact, all of the treaties in a climate smart mode, and to help use them to help address climate change. We have the challenge of how to create equitable access and benefits of areas beyond national jurisdiction to all the nations of the world. We have a challenge of how to protect biodiversity. I think some will say we need far more than 30% of the planet protected, maybe more like 50%. We have the challenge of transparency and how to achieve geopolitical unification, because we are so divided as a planet at this point. And then finally, we have the challenge of how to save and enable resources for use by future generations, and not to use them all up right now. And with that, I'll stop and thank you. And I guess the discussion will come later. Is that correct?
Lisa, this has been an extraordinary and wonderful sweeping view of the issues that we're facing, the appreciation of the oceans as being so significant, the dynamics that drive our lack of understanding, but also the struggle with institutional arrangements which are conflicting often, and place focus on the oceans. And not so much, and only at the end, you appreciate it or sort of refer to the pressures that come from land. In other words, the dumping of various kinds of chemicals and pollutants into the oceans, which add to the pressure on biodiversity, and particularly the species that are in fact in charge of a lot of the carbon sequestration that takes place in the oceans, and perhaps makes up 50% of the global carbon pump. And this understanding is really remote, and therefore we would like to push and appreciate those forces on land who are caring about the oceans, from civil society, which can't wait, are impatient in their trajectory of action, and therefore invite the next speaker. Thank you very much, Lisa. You're right. We'll have a discussion at the end of the talks involving all the speakers and questions that may come into the chat. But may I just move right on? And thank you for staying on time so carefully. It's been a wonderful also opportunity to record everything, and we will have a production that allows everyone to see the recording, and also a kind of a enhanced interpretation of the recording that will allow us to see more and deeper and collect in an archival sense action directions that would be pulled together in June, on June 8th, at the Delhi-based webinar and live conference that we'll hear about a little later. Now, Amber Fatima is a senior director with IIMUN, the Indian International Movement to United Nations, and I'd like her to talk about her role in this kind of agenda from a landlubber's point of view, and not somebody who is a resident and active or a scientist or activist in the oceans, and tell us a little bit in her 15 minutes about what she's doing and how she thinks we can all work together to support what Lisa is calling for so urgently and wonderfully. Thank you, Amber. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here again. We are here, I think, about after a year, and so happy to be here and so excited. Thank you so much for introducing me. I am just gonna quickly screen share to present my presentation, which I hope you all would be able to see. Hope it's visible. Is it visible?
Yes, it is.
Okay,
Go ahead.
great.
Yeah.
Great. So, to start with, I am going to speak today about terrestrial activism as a tool for ocean health, and specifically what a youth led initiative in India called Swat Sagar can teach us about, where intervention is most effective in land to ocean plastic pipeline. So, to start with, the framing of ocean plastic as an ocean problem is something I would argue the first policy error. So 80% of marine plastic originates from land-based sources. Over 11 million metric tons enter the ocean annually, and without serious systemic intervention, that figure is projected to just double by 2040. The ocean is the final destination. However, we project it when we say things like it's water pollution or ocean pollution. We project it as if it is starting from the ocean, but that's not the correct way. It's the other way around. It starts with the land and then eventually it goes to the ocean, which means the most strategically powerful point of intervention is upstream, which is in our cities, along our river systems, at the moment of disposal. So if we only address what's already in the water, we are treating a system that will just perpetually return, and we are not looking necessarily at the root cause. Which takes me to my next slide, which is the land to ocean pipeline. So, necessarily, how plastic travels from land to sea. So, necessarily, the pathways are well documented. So, approximately 1,000 rivers globally account for nearly 80% of riverine plastic entering the ocean. So, in India, when we see specifically the Ganga, the Godavari, the Krishna, these are among the highest contributing waterways. So beyond rivers, there is then also urban storm water runoff functions, which accelerates it every monsoon cycle, carrying plastic again from streets through drainage system into the coastal water bodies, making it again a full process. So what necessarily happens is that when open dumping near coastlines happens, particularly in low income settlements where there is no formal waste collection, as in active waste collection is not happening, it is absent, it creates a more direct feeder point for all the garbage to go into the water. And finally, there is a management blind spot that deserves more attention in maritime governance conversations. So when we speak about port and fishing industry waste, when we speak about any other tourist kind of thing that is going around the water bodies. So that is something that we need to understand, that it starts from the land, it then goes to the river, then to the coast, and then eventually the ocean. And it is the land which carries the plastic to the ocean. Then to the next slide, when we move on and speak about what as the first line of defense, when we talk about what can be the defense mechanism to this, we see what can the civic society do as the first line of defense. So within this pipeline, civic society has three distinct roles. The first is interception, which is organized cleanups, waste segregation campaigns, plastic-free initiatives. So I'm on Swat Sagar project, which is done with the Indian Navy here, operates in this space in which we deploy youth volunteers across cities to physically recover waste from water bodies before it reaches the ocean. So necessarily focus on land, then also focus on the ocean. The second role is the accountability, which is pressuring municipalities to enforce India's plastic waste management rules and demanding meaningful compliance with extended producer responsibility, also EPR, under that framework. And the third, and I think the most structurally durable, is behavior change, which is basically working through schools, colleges, local institutions as to normalize refusal and segregation at the source, which means to see what kind of garbage has to go where. So it is the slowest intervention, but I think it is the one that doesn't require repeated efforts. Then till this year, we did our second edition of Swat Sagar project, and this is what necessarily the ground experience tell us. So running Swat Sagar has produced some clear operational lessons for us, which I think are going to be relevant to this forum. So the first is that hyper-local ownership outperforms top-down mobilization. So when a community feels responsible for an effort, rather than simply recruited into it, we see the impact extends beyond the event. And the second lesson is that the data collection during cleanups transforms activism into evidence. So when you do something and if you have stats for it, and next time you show that stat to the people who are going to be doing it, it creates that positive environment for them to understand that no, something is happening and we are kind of making an impact. So it's mostly documenting the brand, categorizing it, and likely understand the source of recovered waste. That information, I think, becomes a policy tool to help us understand how we can do better for that particular water body. And then third, and I think one of the most important factor that we should integrate is the informal waste sector, which cannot be treated as something which is not essential. So waste pickers already do a lot of work in managing plastic. They are efficient, they are essential. Even though they are informal sector of waste collecting, they do the job, which really helps in recovering more plastic from the bodies, from the water bodies, from the land. Then we need to understand that how land and sea are connected. So people care more when they see the impact clearly, as I mentioned in my point 2, which was data collection. So if they understand that the plastic in their local drain ends up in the ocean, by showing them how the whole pipeline works, I think they would feel more responsible towards it, and I think this would work better than giving environmental messages if we do not tell them how the whole process works and how the whole thing eventually affects the ocean. Then coming to the next point, where activism hits its ceiling. So I want to direct about the limits of what terrestrial activism can achieve, because I think honestly here it is important for policy design. So cleanup without upstream reduction is basically just a treadmill. So without structural changes to the plastic production volumes and municipal waste infrastructure, recovered plastic is replaced within weeks. So India's EPR framework legally obligates producers to manage end of life plastic, but enforcement remains inconsistent, and compliance monitoring is the space where civic society needs to move next. There is also an equity issue that maritime governance needs to take seriously. So fishing communities and coastal populations bear the heaviest burden of marine pollution, while having the least institutional voice in the decisions that affect them. So effective ocean governance has to center their leadership and not only their labor. So as I said again, I think coastal communities bear disproportionate burden. So it's very important that the waste, because they already do a lot of work, so the idea is to protect them, work with them, and also understand with them what is actually happening to that water body. So moving on to next, a little about Swat Sagar second edition. Last year we spoke about it, so also a little on how much we achieved this year. So last year necessarily across India we had touched around 15 cities, but this time we scaled it up, and we scaled it up again with the Indian Navy, where the Swat Sagar initiative returned for its second edition, and this time we touched around 30 cities across India. We had 8,500 volunteers join us for this one shared purpose. And from all the way in the north, all the way into the south, together we collected around 5,000 plus bags of waste, restoring water bodies, and again, as I throughout my presentation mentioned, reignited a wave of environmental consciousness from top to bottom, and made people understand that it's not what is water pollution or what is ocean pollution, but necessarily what doesn't even start from land. It starts from your house. It starts from you not doing segregation of waste properly, you allowing to just dump waste close to the coastlines. So through that awareness, and by doing second edition of Swat Sagar, we did our bit. So just hoping that by all these initiatives and together, we'll be able to protect the oceans. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure speaking.
Well, thank you. A big applause to you too, Amber. It's not possible to provide you with an audio applause. I could push a button and provide that, but Admiral Dowell just did it for you. But it was a wonderful presentation on the very succinct presentation on the complexity of the challenge, but also your grasp of the chain of activities and actions that are required to engage in plastic management on its way to the oceans. It's the kind of activity which enables us to connect people to their places and their own understanding of their role in the production and consumption chain that involves ultimately waste flowing into the oceans. But at this moment, I think we need to also recall that the plastic production is a branch of the fossil fuel industry. It's what oil and gas producers make when they don't find market for oil and gas. They will push for plastic production. So until we defossilize the global economy, so to speak, we'll have still a lot of work to do to catch up with the production and the passing on of that production chain. But the cleanup and, of course, the awareness of reduction of consumption and the flow of that segregation material into recycling opportunities is a very powerful role that civil society can play. And thank you very much, Amber, for highlighting this so importantly. Now, at this moment, I'd like to thank you for that, and I'll invite two speakers who come from very senior expert roles in very different disciplines. And the first of those is professor of zoology that specializes in fisheries and marine biology at the University of Nairobi, Professor Micheni Ntiba. He's been the chairman of the Department of Zoology and director of the School of Biological Sciences at that university in Nairobi. And besides a number of fisheries and marine biology and also aquatic biology related positions in research and teaching, he's also been leading major offices and positions in government. And I will invite Micheni Ntiba hereby, and I will also run his slides for him. It's a one-stop shop here at the Liechtenstein Institute for Strategic Development. Welcome, Micheni. Would you like to share your camera, and also I will put your slides in a presentation mode.
Thank you, Peter. Unfortunately, I can't share my camera. I'm told it's, but thank you very much. And that it's a pleasure to be here again. Last year we were here, and that it's a pleasure to be with you again in this Global Maritime Accord Academy webinar, where we are looking at actions to protect the deep ocean, fight plastics, like we've just been told in the previous, by the previous speaker, and also end overfishing. My focus will be on societal awareness and action needs for saving the ocean, particularly entering through the overfishing problem, making this argument that I think that overfishing is not only a fisheries problem, it is also a societal awareness problem, it is a governance problem, and a justice problem too. And that societal awareness and actions needed alongside other wider ocean issues, like we've been told, are really very important. And also, I think all of you know that fish and fisheries are an integral part of most societies, that they contribute food, security to many people, nutrition, employment, trade, culture, health, well-being, and economic development, not only of the people, but also of our governments, our nations. And I have a few slides. Peter, let's go back to the other slide, where you can see, for example, that fisheries is a whole life support system. Seeing, for example, that 61.8 million people engage in fisheries and aquaculture, that 500 million people supported by small-scale fisheries, that is small-scale fisheries produce 40% of all the global catch, and that most of the workforce, 90% in fisheries, comes from the small-scale fisheries area. And then on the next slide, we see that fisheries is large. As you can see, from 1948 to the present, you can see how the catches have changed from 19.6 million metric tons in 1948 after the Second World War, which climbed very fast, 1970 to about 70 million metric tons. And you can see now from the marine waters, it's about 92.3%, 92.3 million metric tons, which, if I'm not wrong, remember reading somewhere that it had been estimated that the maximum sustainable yield that would have been expected in the total oceans would have been 100 million metric tons. And you can see we are there. So it is large, it is vital, and it is no longer expanding. Next slide. Of course, we all know that overfishing is a serious problem. That's what we have read all these years. And that, looking at this slide, we're trying to demonstrate that probably because of a lot of work by FAO, particularly through the Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries, currently about 64.5% of the known fish stocks are biologically sustainable now. And that it's about 35.5% that still remains overfished, which means if we continue what we are doing, if we continue the awareness, we are likely to solve this problem moving into the future. So in other words, what you're saying is that good management works. All we need to do is upscale it in countries and globally. Next slide. Let us be aware of the hidden drivers of ocean decline, be it from fisheries, where you can see, for example, there's still a lot of IUU, illegal, unreported and unregulated fisheries. There's still the problem of too much fishing subsidies that are there, and that we have already been told that 80% of all pollution that we see in the sea, contrary, does not come from the sea, it comes from land. I think it's important to know that ocean and land interact. And it is that interaction which then can cause a lot of problems, particularly from land-based sources. And so to talk about why we think the world, mostly suffers from acute sea blindness. And that's why we need a lot of societal awareness to be able to solve all these problems. I was trying to recall how when I was a young boy in class 3, primary school, my mother told me of a story where one of his uncles went to fight in a war that was in Mbama. And out there in Mbama, he came face to face for the first time with the ocean. Because I come from Mount Kenya region, very far away from the Indian Ocean, and so was my uncle. And he painted a picture like the sea usually went away to eat. And when it has eaten and it is satisfied, it comes back with a lot of fury. So you see, it is then when I was in the university that I recalled that this was how ocean tides and waves work. And I think that's why I went into this subject. So it means then that very many people in this world live without seeing the sea, but they depend on the sea. That awareness will always shape changes in behavior, will give policy support if people know, and also public accountability. So ocean literacy in schools, in the media, in all communities, and citizens everywhere is a very important matter if we are going to save the seas moving forward. So we need to move from sea blindness to ocean literacy now, particularly in the UN decade for ocean science, so that eventually we can have a citizenry that is wholly oceanic. And I want to list about 7 in the next slide. I'm listing 7 priority areas that I think we need to be aware of. And the first one is on we must integrate ocean literacy into the entire education system from primary school to the university, so that as we are moving forward, then the population of young people after us will be more ocean citizens than us. And I think this is very important. I think it is also important if, for example, everybody understood that all fresh water on earth comes from the ocean, which falls as rainwater that is fresh. So much so that the other day somebody asked me if fresh water comes from the ocean, how comes rain is not salty? So you can see the amount of sea blindness in all this. I think the second one is that marine scientists must become better storytellers. Storytelling is an important thing in the learning of people and impacting knowledge on people. Scientists, let science not be locked in journals, in laboratories, in conferences like we are now. Scientists should work with everybody, be they teachers, artists, youth groups, fishers, local communities, everything. I think it is a challenge to us as scientists that I'm putting forward here, that we need to be greater storytellers. Third is that governments must treat fisheries as national food security and livelihood infrastructure. That fisheries should not be merely be seen as about export earnings, but those other things we talked about before, so that then everybody understands it's not just about earnings. Fourth, we must monitoring, control, surveillance, and enforcement. And I think in the last webinar, I talked about the law, particularly of the fisheries officer, and why there should be a lot of effort to retrain fisheries officers to become a professional cadre in our national governments, so that then they're able to play this role, join everybody else in terms of increasing literacy and us doing the right things. The fifth one is that governments and societies must protect and restore marine ecosystems. And I think an earlier speaker talked about why, for example, global biodiversity target is to ensure that we conserve at least 30% of terrestrial, inland, coastal, and marine waters by 2030. And that the target must not remain on paper. This target, it must be supported by enforcement, financing, science itself, and meaningful participation of local communities. The sixth of these action priority areas is that we must use the new global agreements to drive local actions, so that countries must, introduce these new global agreements in their parliament, so that they can be made laws in their country. And I'm saying this because the ICC Treaty, formerly known as the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Agreement, entered into force on the 17th of January this year. So we need to make these global agreements help us to drive local action. The seventh of these priority areas is that we must make the UN decade practical for ordinary people. And I think this is where we as scientists, in this decade from 2021 to 2030, and you can see it is going away very fast. We need to seek to generate ocean science and knowledge to be able to reverse the decline of ocean systems, and therefore to be able to share all this information with everybody, be it in classrooms, in fishing beaches, markets, media houses, government offices, community meetings, and where community settings are. Those 7 areas. And finally, we need a worldwide citizen movement for the ocean. The movement must connect all these aspects in the sea, from fishing, pollution, climate change, tree planting, and tree growing. We should not just go and plant a tree and leave it there, only to come back later and find that it died. We must nurture it. We must grow it, so that then we can return back our vegetation that has been removed. So therefore, in conclusion, the greatest challenge is not only that fish stocks are under pressure. The greater challenge is that too many people still do not see the ocean as part of their own lives. We thus must move clearly from sea blindness to ocean literacy, and from ocean literacy to ocean citizenship. Overall, therefore, let us make ocean visible in classrooms. Let it be visible in policies. Let it be visible in markets, visible in the media, visible in national budgets, visible in the hearts and the minds of people everywhere. Like my mother made me to visualize the ocean from that very simple story. It is only then that society can demand the action needed to end overfishing and secure ocean for the present and the future generations. I wish to thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michini, Professor Ntiba. You summarized your presentation very well, and I wanted to thank you for producing such a wonderful collection of vignettes, which all build on each other, and on the one hand, very much rooted in a very detailed and professional understanding of fisheries and the policies and practices surrounding those, but also at the same time, the importance of moving outside of these sectoral and professional purviews into society at large. And I wish there was a larger than terrestrial organization that we could appeal to rename this planet from planet Earth to planet Ocean, because I feel that would be the easiest way of changing people's perception and practices and focus, with 71 or 2% of the Earth's surface being ocean. That certainly is a necessary change to make. Now, I'd like to conclude this series of speakers with somebody who has been steeped in institutional and organizational practice, and he's giving a brief talk reflecting on what we just saw, but from his particular professional and service record. He's been for 40 years with the Royal Netherlands Navy until 2019, and he's representing the International Military Council on Climate and Security, an important organization that's connecting climate affairs to security questions and questions also the role of the military. And this is, of course, a crucial aspect, not of only institutionally, but also in terms of personal and professional direction. So he has very practical assignments at sea and on shore. He's commanded frigates and amphibious ships, and he's been leading a NATO task group. And today he's practicing his professional perceptions in this policy advisory role. And I'd like to ask retired Vice Admiral Ben Beckering to therefore take over the stage and conclude this round of perceptions before we then go into the final and concluding sessions. We have very little time or no time for questions. So if anyone wants to have a final question, put them in the chat. Otherwise, I will invite Commodore Sujit Samadar to wrap up briefly and give an outlook on where we're moving from here. But Vice Admiral, go ahead and feel free to take us onto your journey. And I understand you're going to present your slides yourself. If you prefer I do it, I can do it from here. But
sure. Thanks very much, Peter. And allow this digital amateur to see if I can really share this. Oh dear. Oh no, this. I have to. If you give me 1 second. Peter, could you share them for me, please? Because it tells me that I have to restart, and I don't want to do that. So that would be very helpful if you could do that for me. Well, let me kick off as the slides are coming up. Thanks very much to Peter and Admiral Doan to invite me to talk to you. I'm really humbled by the previous speakers. It's a true honor. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a scholar, but a practitioner in maritime security. And from this perspective, I want to sort of widen the net a bit and look at how the ocean fits within our current turbulent and, may I say, sometimes even nasty world in which we live. Are you managing, Peter, or should I?
Let me try again, Ben.
Okay.
There's a new Zoom set up.
Oh, wait a minute.
Can you see that? You should be able to see this presentation. Can you see it?
We can see your presentation and screen, Admiral Ben Beck.
Okay. Do you? Okay. I now wonder if it's my presentation that I share or that Peter is sharing. But let's see if we can.
I'm sharing it. It's your presentation, and you have to say next when you want to go to the next.
Okay. Then I switch it off. Okay, thanks very much. And in the first picture, what you see is where in 2012 on the north coast of Puntland in Somalia, I saw with my own eyes the close relationship between the economy, the environment, and security. As we sought and gained support from the local population for our counter-piracy effort, the local leaders informed us of the devastating effect of the changing weather patterns. It hugely affected the habitability and their livelihood and sparked the rise of extremism in an already volatile region. The north of Somalia, however, is not the only place on Earth. And in order to reverse the trend of climate change affecting security, we need to address the causes of those changing weather patterns, as you are all very much aware, but at the same time also create economic opportunities for the local population to prevent conflict in a holistic manner. Next slide, Peter, please. And I can't see the slides myself, but
we see a crumpled.
It is. I think what you see now is two gentlemen sitting in deck chairs on a ship.
Absolutely, yes.
And that was back in 1941. And these two gentlemen saw the need for an institution that could set standards and norms for international relations, formulate collective approaches to existential threats and risks, and arbitrate conflicts to the benefit of all nations and all people through a fair and equitable global economy. It gave us the United Nations. And in 8 simple bullets on 1 page, they laid down a vision on how the world should look like after World War II. And in it, they reserved a prominent place for the high seas, our oceans and seas. If only they could have had the foresight to see that not only the free use of the oceans was important, but also the responsible use of the oceans. But that would have been, in those days, a near-defined foresight, as climate change in their time was not fully understood and certainly not fully appreciated. The Atlantic Charter therefore focused on the economic benefits of the maritime to mankind. And next slide, please. And it did that not without effect. Ever since, shipping routes and more recently data cables connect the world and form a crucial economic vein system. In addition, the oceans also provide huge quantities of food and energy, which are increasingly relevant because of the growing population. And ever since, albeit not perfect, the international rules-based order did shape conditions for worldwide growth in many fields. Next slide, please. To oversee this, a network of maritime-oriented institutions, all subsidiaries of the United Nations, were established. And I think Lisa showed us an extensive overview of all those organizations. And I mentioned the IMO in London, to the Tribunal in Hamburg, and also the International Court of Justice in The Hague, all based on the UNCLOS agreement, to set standards, to see collective approaches, and to arbitrate conflicts. Next slide, please. But over the recent years, the value of the oceans and seas have surpassed the economic arena of roots, food, and energy. The awareness of the vast ecological and environmental value has grown. However, this growing awareness comes at a time of increasingly tense geopolitical competition, often questioning or even ignoring the value and the role of the international rules-based order, so needed for our oceans' health. Standards on, for instance, innocent passage and maritime borders are no longer adhered to. The oceans and seas, including the straits, are rapidly becoming military maneuver spaces, from the Strait of Hormuz to the many EEZ discussions in the Eastern Mediterranean and many other places. It moves the environmental and ecological consequences to the background, the huge associated risks largely ignored. Next slide, please. On that topic, the omens are already there. Excessive rainfall inland and severe storms and severe storms at sea squeeze vulnerable coastlines with their growing populations and economic centers and their diminishing natural defenses. Disasters happen more often, causing huge economic damage and slowing down further development, and the military increasingly called upon for disaster relief. Next slide, please. Perhaps less visible and less noticeable is the reducing effect of the crucial climate functions of the oceans and seas. Global warming, pollution, and acidification result in less CO2 absorption, less oxygen production, and less moderation and regulation of our weather patterns. These changing patterns are felt everywhere, with the monsoon as a very clear example, but also in my own country, in the Netherlands, not for nothing called the lowlands. Our water boards, the lowest governmental level in the Netherlands, have busied themselves with keeping the water out for almost 1,000 years. And over the last 5 years, they're now developing plans also to keep the water in. Next slide, please. So our oceans and seas need to take care of. Next slide. And how can we prevent conflicts over maritime choke points with devastating and direct and indirect effects on people? How can we ensure a responsible use of the waterways to support an equally responsible economy? And how can we ensure proper adaptation and mitigation measures to keep the effects of climate change to acceptable levels? And how can new technologies and the responsible use of those technologies help us in improving adaptation and mitigation efforts? So in the end, there should not be any need to arbitrate in conflict anymore. We cannot look at these elements in silo. We need a concerted effort. Next slide, please. And this is where we face a huge challenge. This AI-generated picture shows the leaders who currently believe in spheres of influence. This complicates a truly holistic, global approach to the challenges we face. Next slide, please. But this should not stop us. Trying to get 100% global agreement is further away than ever because of the geopolitical tensions. Aiming for full inclusiveness thus becomes the enemy of ambition. Let's not aim just for the perfect solution of 100% agreement, often the Achilles heel of events like the COPs or even the High Seas Treaty, but let's aim for regional and cross-regional coalitions. In the Region North Sea Summit, relevant nations discussed economic, ecological, and security issues in concert. BIMSTEC is doing similar initiatives in the Bay of Bengal region. And last week, 60 nations got together in Colombia to find ways to end the use of fossil fuels. These so-called coalitions of the willing can kickstart also important developments. This is not only necessary, but I'm sure this will give these coalitions considerable advantages in not too far away times. These coalitions don't come about, therefore, these coalitions do not come about naturally. It needs events like this, like the GMA, to create the agenda for the policymakers and the politicians to be aware of, to see the many faces of our oceans in economic, ecological, and military and energy relations. I'm pretty sure that when we keep up the events that we have described in making scientists storytellers and clearing plastics far inland, I'm pretty sure that we will succeed. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Vice Admiral, and I wanted to also thank you for not just a sweeping view of the turmoil and challenges of managing ocean pressures, but also climate pressures as visible on the oceans and coastal regions, but also political turmoil, and particularly the figures and characters that you contrasted with typical Dutch sense of humor with your deep observations at the end of the slide. So we are all in one boat, so to speak. We are all in one ocean, and I thank you for this outlook on the institutional challenges that really affect all institutions of government, all institutions of private and public organizations. And I wanted to also thank you all for presenting this perspective, because we're moving into a year of action after this, turbocharged. And I'd like to ask Admiral Down to join me here and speak also for Commodore Samato, who is very busy and active in the background, and a co-founder of the GMA, a co-founder of SAMBIS, and busy with us all to prepare for the Delhi Summit, which is really a hybrid event on the World Ocean Day on 8th of June. We are at the end of our time, so I also would like to thank everyone for not asking any questions now. That's a bit of a joke. You can ask questions by sending them to gma@us.org, and we will answer them. We'll also provide a recording of this and enhanced interpretation. But let me hand it over to you, Sujit or Admiral Down, to wrap it all up, and thank everyone for presenting so succinctly and in such erudite fashion, but also the audience members and those senior and junior participants that help us make this an important and significant discourse. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Peter. I just wanted to thank everybody, particularly our speakers, for very, very enriching presentations and covering a very vast spectrum of the challenges that are faced by the oceans today, and what we need to do to ensure that our biodiversity is preserved and conserved, as well as the other challenges, whether it be overfishing or the pollution by plastics, and then what we need to do to attend to that. I want to highlight one aspect, and that is that, as I mentioned in the beginning, this webinar is intended as a precursor to our next event, which is the launch of our Ocean Action Year on World Oceans Day, that is the 8th of June. This will be in the form of a hybrid conference, where we have a live stage operating from the Habitat Center at New Delhi, and we will have our participants and the speakers join in from across the world online. So we're looking forward to this, and this will certainly address the issues related both to the health of the oceans, the action plan for countering the negative impact of global warming and climate change, issues which are related to the shipping aspects, which are spewing billions of tons of carbon dioxide in the environment, how we need to work towards sustainable shipping, issues related to the fisheries sector, issues related to the deep oceans, which were talked about by Professor Lisa Levin, the aspect and the dangers of deep seabed mining, because organizations have actually got themselves fully ready as how to go and mine, whether it's the polymetallic nodules or it's from the crests that they will get or the sulfides. But very little thought has been given as to the impact which it'll have on biodiversity. So our aim will be to discuss wide-ranging issues. We'll keep all of you informed well in time as to the shape this conference is going to take, and we look forward to your participation. Thank you very much, one and all, for joining in, and I'm indeed grateful to our speakers and participants for making this webinar a grand success. Thank you very much.
Thank you all, and goodbye. We will be in touch with a link to the recordings, which you can always find on our website. Thank you, and have a good day, evening, or morning.